our remote meeting. And before we move on to tonight's agenda item, I'd like to acknowledge the remote meeting format. On March 6th, I issued an emergency proclamation declaring a civil emergency in the city due to the COVID-19 outbreak. On March 24th, the governor issued Proclamation 20-28, prohibiting meetings that fall under the Open Public Meetings Act, such as our city council meetings, from being conducted in person. The prohibition has been extended through August 1st. Tonight's meeting will be held entirely remote. The meeting will be recorded, streamed live, and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting or make comments. Some of you signed up in advance to make comments. If anyone is on the call who did not sign up but would like to speak, please press *3 on your phone and we will add you to the speakers list. At this point in time, we'll take a moment to take a roll call of the council members in attendance. So please say here when I call your name. Councilmember DeMichelle?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall?
Here.
Thanks. Council President Hunt?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks?
Here.
Deputy Council President Ray?
Here.
Councilmember Walsh?
Here.
Thank you. All 7 of our council members are in attendance this evening. We also have various city staff that are participating in tonight's special meeting, including City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz, City Attorney Jim Haney, Human Services Coordinator Monica Negrilla, City Clerks Tina Eggers, and Deputy City Clerk Tisha Gieser. Other city staff may also be in attendance. And for those members of the public on the call, welcome. The clerk or I will call on you to make comments when we reach that portion of the agenda. So we do have some meeting guidelines to go over. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking and mute your microphone when you are not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there's a delay. For council members, please continue to use the chat box to indicate when you wish to speak. Please identify yourself on camera before you ask a question, make a motion or second a motion, or participate in debate. The next item on our agenda this evening is public comment, and for those providing comments, please make sure to direct your comments to the whole council and not individuals. While this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed, and I will note that there were some correspondence received today that does have questions in it. When recognized, unmute your microphone, and on your phone, *6 may be an option to do that. State your name, address, and relationship to the city. Speak clearly and pause frequently. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes, and please remute your microphone when done. If you do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will still need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted, and if a speaker is out of order, I will ask them to stop and mute their microphone, but if a speaker does not comply, I may direct staff to mute the microphone. If a disruption to the meeting occurs and order cannot be restored, I may have to direct staff to remove you from the call. Citizen comments, written and verbal, are an important aspect of the public process, and the City Council and the Mayor takes these comments seriously. And we thank you for taking the time tonight to address us. City Clerk, can you please identify the first person who has signed up to speak this evening?
Yes, Kyle Woodring. Kyle, I'm unmuting you now.
Hi, this is Kyle Woodring. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks. Hi, Kyle Woodring. I am the Government Affairs Director for the Rental Housing Association of Washington. RHA is a trade association that has membership of over 5,000 housing providers who pay less than $20 a month for forms, education, housing advocacy, and other resources designed for self-managed properties. Even before these emergency orders on eviction began in the spring, our organization was one of the first to put forward best business practices to waive late fees, hold physical evictions and rent increases, and work with renters to create reasonable payment plans that worked for all parties. While we stand ready to work with stakeholders and the council to develop policies to address the financial crisis being felt by both tenants and our members in Issaquah and across the state, we have some legitimate concerns with the legislation as it's currently being drafted. We appreciate that the bill contains language that creates a nexus between the eviction policy and a COVID-related financial hardship. While uncommon, there does exist tenants who have not experienced these COVID-related financial hardships that are choosing not to pay rent or communicate with their housing provider. And smaller housing providers like our members are least situated to endure those costs of continual non-payment, which restricts their ability to create workable payment plans with other tenants and burns through the small rainy day funds that they have saved up. So we appreciate the detailed payment plan that's also in the legislation, but would like to have a conversation with the crafters of the legislation to make sure that the policy aligns with previously agreed upon payment plans that were based off of the guidance from the Attorney General and the Governor's office under their eviction bans. Also, as a COVID-related emergency policy, we think that this nexus should be also extended to the charging of late fees. Late fees are one of the only methods to incentivize these elected non-payers from continually refusing to pay rent for their housing costs. And we think that COVID nexus should also apply to that policy. I think most importantly, having read the legislation, we have some concerns that the bill appears to have no sunset date or period of time in which these policies would go away. I think that implies for our folks that this would be the policy in perpetuity in the city, and I think that contradicts the stated purpose of the regulations. So we'd love to have a conversation and sort of figure out how to work on some of these things around the bill. We're glad that you guys have looked at this and are coming up with reasonable policies, but would of course like to stakeholder the process and bring in some of our members who have property in the city and have some concerns around these things that go to their costs. So appreciate the time.
Thank you, Kyle. I wonder if I just want to make a reminder to make sure everybody's giving their address and relationship to the city, and I think you did that at the beginning, Kyle. Thank you. So for the rest of our speakers this evening also as well, please make sure to give your address and relationship to the city. Next on the speakers list, Tisha?
Yes, next we have Jane M., but I don't see her on the line, so we'll move to Kurt Krieger. Kurt, I'm unmuting you.
Thank you. My name is Kurt Krieger. Last name is Kreager, and I'm speaking to you from Bellevue, Washington today. I'm a 26-year resident of Issaquah up until the time when I downsized and moved into a condo here in Bellevue. So I know Issaquah well. I'm speaking to you mostly as a individual real estate investor, but also as an advisor to other real estate investors. And I do ditto what Kyle was talking about, the fact that a lot of rental owners are small business people. We're just hardworking people. We typically don't have the resources to weather some of the burdens that we are being imposed with right now. And I can tell you that just from experience, from feedback that I'm getting from many of my clients in real estate who own investment property, is that they're opting to sell that property. If they get a vacancy, somebody moves, they're taking a serious look at selling their property rather than continuing to deal with unfriendly landlord laws that are being passed. And this ultimately hurts long-term the tenants that you indeed are trying to protect. Now, I did send an email that to all of you that details this a little more. But I think the three main takeaways that I'd like to have are this, is that the consequences of the actions you're considering are going to hurt the tenants that you indeed are trying to protect by reducing the housing stock. The less friendly you are to landlords, the more likely they are to sell their properties. Single families are certainly at risk because the market is so hot right now. If a landlord gets a opening, a vacancy, they are opting to sell. I can count about a dozen just in my small world. If you multiply that by thousands of agents and multiple thousands of owners throughout the King County area, there is going to be a decline in available housing. Therefore, costs are going to go up and choices are going to be less. Number two is both places like the city of Auburn and even King County have decided to table this discussion and wait for the state. As I said in my email, right now residents are covered through October by the state mandate. I do not see any reasons to make hasty decisions when the residents that you are trying to protect are indeed protected already. And third, I believe that you need to invite stakeholders into the conversation, both at the state level and at the local level, to craft situations and solutions that will actually solve the problem. One of the problems we have is that people are being encouraged to, number one, get farther in debt in their rent. That certainly is not helpful. Number two, there are people out there that are abusing the system. You do need to make some consideration for the fact that if somebody can be paying the rent and is refusing to, that there is a mechanism somehow for that to be resolved. I know of several people who are at risk of losing their rental because they can't pay the mortgage because they're not being paid by a person who is either working or collecting unemployment and making more than he used to make. So I encourage you to vote no on this, and I encourage you to table it, invite stakeholders into the discussion, and craft some solutions that will actually work long term. As I said in my email, affordable housing was a problem before COVID ever hit our shores. This has just made it worse. Making hasty decisions, I do not believe, are in the tenants' best interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. And Tisha, would you tell us who our next speaker is? And let's make sure we get the address and relationship to the city. Thank you.
Yes, next we have Carol Gong. Carol, I'm unmuting you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Carol, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so I'm Carol Gong, and I'm a property owner at Issaquah Highland. I have sent you an email earlier. So I think Kyle and the previous person made a lot of points. I just want to make one point, is that any policy the city of Issaquah is going to make need to be fair. So I think this piece of legislation is not fair. It's not going to help the city of Issaquah. It's kind of taking the rental property from the property owners. They have mortgage, they have operating expenses to pay. So one of the things I just don't understand is, this COVID-19 thing hit almost everybody, caught everybody off the guard. So, I mean, will city of Issaquah go talk to Safeway in Issaquah saying, okay, all the people comes in, they hit COVID-19, they come in to get grocery without paying. They have to defer the payment. So landlord is running the business as every other business. They don't have PPP loan like other small business, other big business. And any legislation need to consider both sides. And if you guys are going to, defer the payment, do you have any measures in place to help the property owner? So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Carol, thank you for joining us. Tisha, are there any other speakers signed up this evening?
No one further is signed up. I will ask if there's anyone else on the call who's interested in making comments to press *3 on your phone. That's *3. Let me take just a moment here. I do see we have a phone-in caller who'd like to make comments. Phone number 585-414. I'm unmuting you.
Hi, thank you so much, Mayor and City Council, for letting me speak at the last minute. This is Edmund Witter. I'm the Senior Managing Attorney of the Housing Justice Project at the King County Bar Association. My relationship to Issaquah is that we represent 95% of all tenants facing eviction in King County, and that includes Issaquah. I heard a lot of the previous comments. I do want to sort of explain some of the things that I think are kind of misguided about those. For one, tenant protections, when we looked at American Community Service or survey data, have not actually had a negative impact on rental housing stock. So the idea, even in normal times, that when you enact just cause protections or any other items, that they would actually have an adverse impact on rental housing stock is just frankly not true, and it doesn't hold up in the empirical data that we've ever seen on this issue. Secondly, this is a really important ordinance to be able to protect some of your most vulnerable tenants, and you have a lot of them in Issaquah. And you would be in danger of potentially losing a lot of your low-income, affordable housing tenants if you don't pass necessary protections at this point. The U.S. Census data right now shows that this is a really racialized pandemic, and the impact it's having on renters is extremely racialized. 42% of Black households right now in Washington have not been able to pay June's rent. 24% of Latinx households have not been able to pay rent for June. In contrast, 8% of white households were not able to pay rent. The stark contrast is extremely racialized. So what you are doing today is trying to correct and put some balance into that structure. I think you heard the earlier comments from the Rental Housing Association, which frankly kind of just talked about some concerns with maybe the payment plan, but the payment plan is never going to be perfect. We've had a lot of back and forth on what would be a good payment plan. I even have concerns about having a strict standard like this because it's not a one-size-fits-all category, but there are a lot of benefits because it gives some certainty to both landlords and tenants to have a structured payment plan like the one that you have here, and it provides a lot of support to make sure that people know what is expected of them from both sides. Right now, a lot of tenants were forced out of their jobs to be able to protect our most vulnerable members of our society right now because of the impact that COVID is having. We forced a lot of people out of their jobs. We cannot evict them too. We need to provide some certainty, and Issaquah, I think, is making a very important step right now to make sure that there is some certainty and some clarity for everybody on all sides within your community to know exactly what's expected of them, the protections they're going to have, and what they need to do in the upcoming months to be able to get them back on our feet, and so hopefully we can all move on. And the last thing I'll just mention that there is a lot of money that we're currently working on trying to get out to landlords. There's about $40 million that King County is looking to provide the landlords to provide support. That has to be spent by October 31st, and this is going to provide some additional support to make sure that those tenants who need to get that rental assistance are going to be able to do so within that time. This is really critical because I think this is going to be probably a longer issue, but that's going to go past the state moratorium. It's likely we're going to see people behind on rent going well into winter. And there might be some additional federal stimulus package that's currently going to provide some more rental assistance. And we need to build time in to make sure that those Issaquah tenants are going to be able to access that resource and make sure that landlords are ultimately going to get paid too. But we don't want people to get evicted in the meantime. I urge you to vote yes on this. This is important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edmund. Tish, is there anyone else indicating a desire to speak to the council this evening?
No, there's not.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us this evening and providing your perspectives. Very helpful. In addition, there have, at any point in time, written comments can be submitted to the City Council email address at citycouncil@issaquahwa.gov. And in addition, comments received by email on tonight's agenda topics will be acknowledged by the Council President Hunt under the relevant agenda item. The next agenda item is AB 8013, Housing Stability, Local Defense Against Evictions. The council action is adopt the ordinance, and at the July 20th City Council meeting, the City Council directed the administration to prepare this item for consideration at tonight's special council meeting. I'd like to invite City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz to introduce this item. I'm not sure if it's Administrator Bobkowitz or Mr. Haney, our legal counsel, but I'll let whoever wants to jump in, jump in.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, let me take a quick start at this. As you know, we were asked to work on an ordinance. Other things have happened in the world since we were asked to work on the ordinance, so I'm going to ask City Attorney Jim Haney to kind of catch us up on the last week as well as walk through the ordinance, and we'll be prepared to answer any questions. Jim?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. First of all, as you'll recall back a week ago today, you requested that we prepare this ordinance, and at that time, it was uncertain whether Governor Inslee was going to extend the proclamation imposing a moratorium on evictions, which the governor had set to expire August 1st. It was uncertain whether he was going to extend that, and you requested that we prepare this ordinance with an emergency clause so that we could make sure it was in effect in case the governor's order expired. Last week, in the middle of the week, we heard that the governor was probably going to extend the order. On Friday, the governor did issue a proclamation. It is Proclamation 20-19.3, and he issued the proclamation extending the governor's moratorium on evictions. The proclamation does a number of things. First, it extends a moratorium on evictions. Second, it prohibits the charging of late fees. Third, it requires that there be repayment plans, although the governor's order says that the repayment plan is to be reasonable based on the individual financial circumstances, health, and other circumstances of the individual renter. And it does provide a prohibition on retaliation against renters for exercising their rights under the proclamation. That went into effect immediately upon the governor's signature, and it is scheduled to expire October 15th. So it is good through October 15th. The ordinance before you is an ordinance that would do many of the same things that the governor's order provides. It doesn't specifically provide for a moratorium on evictions. Rather, it provides that tenants have a defense against an eviction for non-payment of rent if the non-payment was due to a substantial reduction in income due to COVID-19 or for other reasons that were related to COVID. It also provides that late fees will not be charged, and it provides tenants with a defense against late fees if they are charged based on this ordinance. It also provides for a payment plan, but it is more specific than the governor's payment plan. It provides for payments based on the amount of rent that is due, and it provides specifics on a payment plan, unlike the governor's order, which provides for a reasonable plan based on the tenant's individual circumstances. It also provides for a prohibition on retaliation, like the governor's order does. And finally, it provides that a tenant can terminate their tenancy if they if in fact they lose income or job due to the COVID crisis. So it is quite similar, as I say. It does contain an emergency clause, and again, that was because we anticipated that if the governor did not extend his order, that you might want to declare an emergency and make your ordinance effective immediately. So that's a summary of what we have before you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Haney. So with all things COVID, you only have to wait a day or two for the world to change, not a new circumstance, throw another wrench in the works. A lot has happened since last Monday, both at the governor's level, but also even within our region. This is a major point of discussion between most of us, and a hope and a desire that between the county and the cities in general that we can come up with a solution that is good. So having said that, before we move to Q&A, I want to take this moment just to throw this out to the body of seven. The original action was to bring something forward tonight and vote on it. I want to take the census of the body on how you feel about proceeding going forward. I see there are a couple of questions there already. If we could hold those for a second, I'd really like to sort of hear from the council about, are we going to proceed with this item this evening and continue on through Q&A, council deliberations and voting, or does anybody have any additional thoughts? A comment from Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, this is Councilmember Walsh. Do you want to do?
Yeah, I do.
A good comment, yeah.
There's a fabulous suggestion in the chat box about having a summary of public email because some of the speakers here this evening did send us some, but we've had more. So Council President Hunt, would you like to summarize that for us?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We did receive an email from a resident that was concerned about balancing all the things that needed to be balanced and in support of having the more certainty around eviction. So very concerned for the financial hardship as well as the health concerns around COVID. We also received and I apologize if this isn't the correct number, but we did receive most of these emails today and this afternoon. I believe it's about 12 emails mostly from landlords or landlord associated organizations, representatives of those organizations, with concerns about the ordinance. And some of the concerns that were recurring were around the timing, how long the ordinance would last, as well as questions around unintended consequences or concern around unintended consequences. And also a number of them also spoke to the good intent of the bill, but the concern for the unintended consequences. And as the mayor pointed out earlier, some of the emails that we received did have specific questions in them. So, and a lot of those questions, I believe, also have a legal aspect to the questions. So rather than try to answer those, we will make sure to get answers out to folks, but probably need the time to process those questions and not this evening.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. I do want to point out to Councilmember Martz and Councilmember Walsh that your name was misspelled on many of the emails. And so if the city clerks can forward those on to you, that's probably why you're scratching your head going, there wasn't 12. I know because I answered the emails and I got bounced back from both of you. So we'll have to make sure that the two of you also get all of those comments. So again, to the group, and what is the direction from the body going forward? Are we ready to go into Q&A on the specifics of this ordinance and move forward to this vote? Are there any thoughts? And if there are no thoughts, that's great. We will just move to Q&A. Council President Hunt.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to take a look at the situation holistically. So when I did propose this, and I believe it was unanimous to have this come forward this evening for our discussion, that was before we knew that the governor would extend the eviction moratorium. So that is, I think, an important context piece of what has happened between the last time we spoke about this, which was just a week ago, and today. I appreciate the number of comments that we have received from different perspectives. I think that we received some requests to bring stakeholders into the discussion, and I would like to have a discussion this evening. I think we have an opportunity to have that discussion with council. At the same time, I want to recognize that we have received a number of requests to bring stakeholders into the conversation, and given the context change around the governor's eviction moratorium being extended, I think we potentially have that as an option and could consider our options this evening.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. I'm seeing a few more comments in here. I will go to Councilmember Walsh and Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. I'm interested in having a conversation tonight because I think we have the time, and there's a lot of questions there and a lot of things for us to discuss. I don't know that I feel like we're going to get to a resolution point, but I think we have a conversation that needs to be had. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Zach Hall. Yeah, I'll echo what's being said. I would like to also have a brief conversation tonight since we're all here and we've all kind of read, we're all studied up. But I think the sense of urgency has shifted, and I think it's appropriate if the body decides to delay it or think about it a little bit more, go back, bring more people to the table, recognizing, we heard a lot in the past, we've heard a lot from renters, and we heard a lot from landlords today too. So recognizing we're going to have a discussion. We hear you, renters, you're struggling. We hear you, landlords, you're struggling as well. And we want to, bring everyone together and find a solution that's best for our community. Another reason why I think, I'll save those comments for later. But those are my initial comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Ray for a comment?
Sure. Thank you. This is Chris Ray. I think that we can have a brief conversation tonight, but if we're going to not take action tonight, then we should save that for a conversation that we have with an audience that represents all of our stakeholders, and we can do that in the future. And I concur with Councilmember Hall. The situation has changed, and we have an opportunity to be a little more circumspect about this. A week ago, we were facing a cliff, and we're not facing a cliff right now. That all being said, to the comment thing, is I think there are still some questions that need to be answered about what's on the table vis-a-vis the governor's order, because I don't know that we have clarity about the distinctions that we are drawing some very specific distinctions between what's in the governor's order and what's in our ordinance, and it's not clear to me, and I'm going to guess not clear to the vast majority of the public what those distinctions are. So I think we still have a little bit of work to do tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Ray. I am looking in the chat box and not seeing any other folks that would like to comment. It's pretty clear that there's going to be a discussion tonight because that is the majority will, for sure. So I'm going to backtrack up through the chat box and start off with Councilmember Ray for a question, followed by Councilmember DeMichelle. Councilmember Ray, or Deputy Council President Ray.
Yeah. Hi, this is Chris Ray, and this is a multi-part question, and it's all for City Attorney Haney. The first is, Jim, can you talk about what's the difference between a defense to eviction / a late fee versus a moratorium on a eviction / late fee?
Yeah, I can do that. As you'll recall, we talked about last week that there is a case out there called Margola Associates versus City of Seattle, which says that it is valid for a city to set up defenses to evictions. In that case, the City of Seattle set up as a defense to eviction a requirement that a landlord be registered. And if a landlord was not registered with the city, that was a defense to eviction. So I think the reason that these ordinances tend to get phrased as a defense is because we're trying to fit within what the Supreme Court said in the Margola case as was allowed. I think a moratorium, a strict moratorium on evictions, like what the governor has imposed, may take a broader power, because then what you are looking at in terms of an eviction moratorium is you are looking at essentially saying that state law, which allows for evictions under a specific scheme called unlawful detainer, you're saying that state law no longer applies. And the governor clearly has authority under the emergency powers granted to the governor in RCW 43.06.220 to suspend state law. Cities do not. And so we're trying to thread the needle, as it were, by saying that this is a defense within the limits of the Supreme Court statement in Margola. So hopefully that answers your question.
Deputy Council President Ray, it's a multi-part question, is it not?
It is a multi-part question.
Okay.
Yeah. Then thank you for that. It's very still an interesting interpretation that a fine line, I'll say. So the governor's order, does the governor's order supersede our ordinance when it comes to payment plans, and as long as the governor's order is in place?
Well, it does provide, I mean, the governor's order is in place and it does provide for a reasonable payment plan. To the extent that our ordinance goes further than that, I think it probably can go further than that. It can regulate a little bit. It cannot do less than what the governor says.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DiMichele. Jim, I have a couple of questions. The first one is we heard from a lot of people who said this particular ordinance does not appear to have an end date or a termination date. And when I read through it, I thought it was pretty clear that there were. Could you talk about why some people are reading that this doesn't have a termination date or a, can you just
Sure.
tell us what it says?
There isn't a specific date by which this terminates. There isn't, like in the governor's order, October 15th, the governor's order expires. There is not that in this ordinance. But what this ordinance does do is it defines the time period during which the prohibitions will apply as being the time period during which the governor has declared a civil emergency. So to the extent that the governor's civil emergency order remains in effect, this ordinance would continue to apply because everything is tied to what happens during the period of civil emergency. So if the governor's civil emergency order was lifted in November, this ordinance would only apply to delinquencies in rent, payment of late charges, all of those things that occurred while that governor's order was in effect. So there is an end date. It's just not a specific date.
Councilmember DiMichele, do you have a follow-up question?
Well, I have another question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. We heard also from a lot of people about this issue of people just choosing not to pay. And it's been my understanding that in order to receive rental assistance, or for this particular ordinance also, people would have to have proof that they either lost their job because of COVID, or they got sick because of COVID, or they had someone in their family they had to take care of because of COVID. They would have to prove that. And if none of those apply, then this ordinance doesn't apply to those situations. Can you clarify that for me?
Yes, and I think we need to make maybe a distinction here. The first distinction is that in the provisions of this ordinance, which provide for a defense to the tenant against non-payment of rent, the tenant has to prove in the unlawful detainer action, he has to submit some sort of declaration or certification in the unlawful detainer action that he or she lost their job, had a substantial reduction in et cetera, relating to COVID. So with respect to that, it's really clear. With respect to the late fees, what I heard tonight is someone say, well, that needs to be tied to COVID as well. And we could certainly do that. The governor's order does not tie that to COVID, but we could certainly do that. It's not specific in this ordinance, however. This ordinance is like the governor's order in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. Two questions, which I think are important for context. So the first one is, it was referenced what other cities were doing in public comments, and I wondered if you could reiterate. I think we did have an overview last time, but what has been done, for instance, for King County unincorporated?
Well, my understanding, and perhaps Monica can Monica Negrilla can talk a little bit more about that, but my understanding is that King County has imposed an ordinance which prohibits or which essentially raises a defense for the tenant, similar to the first section of this. Auburn has done the same thing, and I believe that Burien, I believe, has passed something similar to this. But perhaps Ms. Negrilla can comment as well.
Sure. Monica, do you want to join the conversation?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My understanding is from what I read in the King County unincorporated ordinance, I think the main differences that I've noticed are regarding the payment plan. I think there are just a few different specificities, such as I think the payment plan in that ordinance asks for 1/3 or for landlords to require no more than 1/3 of the payment in addition to the regular rental assistance when they create those payment plans. And then the other detail was related to the start date being September, I believe, for when the payment plans would start.
Council President Hunt, does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it does. And then my second part to that question is if there are other conversations going on regionally that we should be aware of as far as what is in the works for other cities in addition to the examples that were just mentioned.
So in talking with other cities on the east side and south, I know that they are looking. However, no other cities have taken action at this time. I think closest to taking an action was the city of Kirkland. However, no specific date as of Friday was set for that either.
Council President Hunt, I'll also offer, this is the mayor, that at the mayor's meetings that we have through SCA on a weekly basis during COVID, there is talk from at least the Strong Mayors group of trying to ensure that on the east side we have a more a model ordinance that we would be able to jointly develop and jointly sign on to. That's just at the mayor's level. Council President Hunt, do you have additional questions? Oh, thank you. I'll move to Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. Question for our city attorney, and you might have just answered my question, but let me ask it in a different way just to make sure. I'm interested in the nuance between some of the sections. So section 1 talks about unpaid rent, which became due to the civil emergency, and then it lists out what those circumstances are, including suffered a loss of employment, reduction hours, have COVID, caring for a family member with COVID. And then section 2, to late fees, just says that it's imposed against a tenant for rent that became due during the civil emergency. So is that the same, or are the circumstances the same by which section 2 would apply to a tenant, or is it different?
It's not necessarily the same, but again, this section is very similar to what the governor's order provides. The governor's order doesn't tie the late fees issue specifically to the COVID situation either.
Oh, okay. You did answer my question previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. Councilmember Goodman here. As we've talked about, or we talked about last week, the residential landlord-tenant laws is a body of law that is predominantly preempted by state law, with very few jurisdictions having their own residential landlord laws and codes. And I wondered if there has been any talk, rumor, suggestions, any of that, maybe talking to our city lobbyists, if there's been any talk about legislature taking up this topic to try to have something amended in the Residential Landlord Tenant Act that would give us more consistency throughout the state. Wouldn't surprise me if if we get closer to mid-October, that there's more of that talk. So I'm just wondering if we have heard anything as of late.
Let's start with our city attorney and then give City Administrator Bob Kowitz a chance to weigh in if he has additional information.
I have no information on that topic. Perhaps City Administrator Bob Kowitz does.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, no, we've been checking with AWC, the Association of Washington Cities, throughout this. I think many communities in the state are following the governor's lead. At this point, we don't expect the legislature to be back in Olympia until January, so I don't suspect there will be any statewide initiatives on this matter at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we have worked our way through the initial round of questions. I'll give it a few seconds to see if anybody else wants to sign up for questions. Okay. Council member, oh, here we go. Lots of stuff going on here. Council member Ray, would you like to make a motion?
I would. Would you like to take Councilmember Hall's question first?
If I could.
You may.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. Never mind.
That was fun. Okay, back to Deputy Council President Ray.
All right. Hi, this is Chris Ray. I'd like to move to refer Agenda Bill 8013 to a special study session on August 25th, 2020, returning to the full council on or before September 9th, 2020.
Could someone indicate in the chat box if they would raise their hand? Council President Hunt.
I'll second this, Council President Hunt.
I do not have that motion in front of me, but it has been moved and seconded. I wonder, Deputy Council President Ray, if you could read that aloud for everybody again.
I'd be happy to. I move to refer Agenda Bill 8013 to a special study session on August 25th, 2020, returning to the full council on or before September 9th, 2020.
Thank you. Oh, and there it is in the chat box as well. Deputy Council President Ray, would you like to address the motion followed by Council President Hunt?
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Chris Ray. I think that we are given the luxury of some time on this by the governor's extension of the moratorium until the middle of October. I think that this is an important piece of work that we're doing. I think right now people are dealing with great deals of uncertainty. People are concerned about their long-term housing prospects. They're concerned about their long-term economic prospects. And we also have landlords who are concerned about their economic prospects. And we have many people that we need to consider as we move this forward. And I am thankful to Governor Inslee, and to Council President Hunt and Mayor Pauly for sending him a letter, which I'm sure is what convinced him to extend the moratorium. But I think we do have an opportunity, and I think we need to take advantage of this. I think this is an agenda bill that we need to push forward, but I think we need to do it with more voices at the table, and we have now that luxury, and so I would like us to do that. There's a couple of things that are of note to me in my motion. One is August 25th is not a scheduled study session, so that's asking us to do another study session. And then the date of September 9th is so that we can bring this back and vote on it without having to declare an emergency. That would provide the 30 days for it to take effect before the governor's moratorium might expire again.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. Council President Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Council President Hunt. I want to speak to for a minute about why I think we are considering this agenda bill and ordinance in the first place, and that is we received an email last week from a resident who was very concerned about balancing all of the needs that this resident had, and concern about the virus, and concern for health and well-being of family, and then uncertainty with the economic crisis around COVID-19, and all of that adding up to so much anxiety. And that story, actually specifically this resident wrote that they had not written to their government before. And I think that this story is, it's absolutely in our community. It's absolutely happening. People are very anxious right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of uncertainty about whether the eviction moratorium would be extended. And while I am grateful that it was extended, I think we need to continue to consider this avalanche of evictions that is, I think, coming, because when the eviction moratorium ends, people will not all of a sudden necessarily be able to pay, given all of the other economic issues around COVID-19 right now. So I think that we should consider, as Councilmember Ray said, I think we do have the ability to bring in more stakeholders and understand the stakeholders' perspectives, and I think we have a responsibility to do that, and we do have an opportunity to do that. But I also want to make it really clear that for me, it is very important and a priority right now to protect those who are most vulnerable in our community, and those that are most vulnerable specifically to becoming homeless. Because I think if we do not take preventative measures to support people to stay in their homes right now, people don't have a lot of options. They can't necessarily go and find a family member because of the pandemic that's happening. It's a very, very challenging time. And homelessness, once a family becomes homeless, that becomes another huge challenge, and I don't want that to be the challenge. So I think this is very important. I would like to see resources allocated to addressing this issue, to making sure that landlords and tenants are, that we have both of those stakeholders in the way that we address this issue. But I think we need to have resources put towards this, because it is a huge emerging, looming issue. And I also listened to the way that this was presented at the King County Council meeting, and King County Councilmember Claudia Balducci talked about the need for a glide path. Once the eviction moratorium is ended, people need to be able to have that certainty about how they're going to be able to continue to stay in their homes. And I think that having landlords and landlords and tenants work together on how that's going to work is important. Certainty around a payment plan is very important, and I think that's one of the most important aspects of this kind of policy. So I appreciate the opportunity that we have to look at this further. It's very important, and I want to make sure that we take the resources, put forward the resources to support this.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. I'm going to be supporting this motion tonight. Following up on my previous comments, like I said, this sense of urgency has certainly shifted, and we want to be able to invite everyone to the table in order to make good policy. But in addition to ensuring everyone's heard, I think this also gives us time to be on the same page about what is in this agenda bill and what isn't, not just for our tenants and our landlords, but also us here on council. I read a lot of emails that came in from individuals who I think would probably be very happy to know that the current bill actually does address most of their concerns. There were a few things I think very much are worthy of discussion in the pursuit of good policy, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page about some of the inconsistencies I noticed between those emails and the current policy proposal. And, you know, also just recognizing that I'm seeing this as a fair compromise with positives for renters and property owners. So that could also mean that I'm in a bubble and I'm just seeing this through my own bias, which I think taking a step back now that we have some breathing room is a good idea. Because of that, I think it'd be a good idea for our next touch to be able to touch on all the points that were emailed to us in comparison to our current agenda bill. So that way we have a deep level of understanding there. And I'm sure there's even more that we haven't even thought about. And that's, you know, what's so great about bringing people together and talking. So those are my comments, and I'll be supporting this motion this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Councilmember DiMichele.
I'll be very brief because I agree with everything that Council President Hunt and Councilmember Hall just said. I could have voted yes for this motion tonight, but I think if we delay, we're going to get a better ordinance, and it'll be a fairer ordinance as people have asked us to do. I also think it'll give us time to communicate with those people who spent the time to communicate with us this afternoon. And I think there was misunderstandings about how the law applies or would be applied. And I think this gives us an opportunity to talk that through and hear if there are any further concerns. And so I will be supporting this motion now, but I think we're on the right track. I just think that we can make it a little bit better. Thanks.
Thank you. I am waiting a few seconds to see if any other council members would like to raise their hand through the chat function. I also wanted to check in with City Administrator Bobkowitz. We can do it before the vote or after the vote, but just to verify that maybe we'll do it after the vote, just to verify that the expectation is clearly understood of what is coming back and what work needs to be done. I'm not seeing any comments. We'll go back to the motion, which was to refer AB 8013 to a special study session on August 25th, 2020, returning to the full council on or before September 9th, 2020. And I'm going to turn it over to our city clerk for a roll call vote.
Yes, and Council President Hunt is beginning the vote this evening. So Council President Hunt.
Aye.
Councilmember Martz.
Aye.
Deputy Council President Ray.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh.
Aye.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, 0 nays.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. I'd like to get City Administrator Bobkowitz to provide some comments and feedback on what he heard and what he thinks the expectations are so that we are prepared for that study session. City Administrator Bobkowitz.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I think the council has given us a tall order, and that is to come up with statewide housing policy. And so that's going to be difficult. It's sad that we've not been able to find other communities within King County that have raised this issue to the highest level. So your staff, I think, will be looking to our neighbors around King County, our neighbors throughout the state of Washington, to see if there is a plan. I think, as the council president said, a glide path. We ourselves in the city of Issaquah cannot solve the housing problems of the region or the state, but your staff will spend its August days trying to sort through this to the best of our ability, and we'll reach out to the folks that we've heard from. The Landlord Association hopefully will be a willing partner in these discussions. But again, we're going to be looking for other communities to join us because I think the burden should not be solely on this city council or this community to solve what is not only a statewide problem, but a nationwide problem. So we're going to be looking for some help in the next few weeks.
Let me ask a clarifying question. Is it a possibility then to, when the word resources is used, to look at providing supplemental non-staff resources to research and get the information that the council wants? And because if we don't have the staff capacity to do it, is there another way to do this?
Not easily. I think we will look to our neighbors. Again, it is remarkable to me that most of our neighbor communities have simply said, "Well, we trust the state government and the federal government, and everything will be okay." Given the enormity of the issue, that is a curious thing. I think many communities are still trying to figure out how to balance their own city budget with resources being depleted and the issues there. There are just so many issues that local governments around Washington state and around the country are being asked to do. I think many of our neighbors have said, this is just a big one, and we're trying to make sure how can we pay our employees and continue to maintain basic city services. So I guess one good thing is that we took action early on to grapple with some of these issues, but your staff is absolutely stretched, and to ask one or two staff members who have tried for the last several weeks to get their colleagues in other communities and in King County interested more aggressively in this issue and have largely fallen, I hate to say deaf ears, but I think ears that say we have lots of other priorities in our community we're trying to balance. So, Madam Mayor, members of the council, I don't mean to be a naysayer. I don't mean to set a bad tone, but I also want to set an appropriate expectation that we ourselves in the city of Issaquah can only do so much on this issue. We will do our best over the next few weeks to do that. But it's been a difficult several months, and we will continue to work diligently to bring the council the information that it's looking for.
So I appreciate your comments. The reason I asked about external resources, and even if this council wanted to pay additional funding for external resources, is 2 cities have done what we've done. So we've already cut $6.5 to $7 million worth of expenses. Those are jobs, those are gone. Others have not. And so if the council would agree that additional resources could mean really just throwing this problem back out to the cities and asking those that have staff to provide information and pull together would be great. And so I'd kind of like to entertain that conversation with council right now when we use the word resources. Could it be that we just put an invitation out to others to come to a table and talk about it, and that we not manage it with our staff? They still have staff, we do not. And I'm going to start with Council President Hunt.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to make a comment to the comments that were provided by the city administrator, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Directly, okay. So I think that part of, I think that it is a regional issue right now. Housing stability is definitely a regional issue. It's not something unique to us. We have a responsibility to work on finding solutions for our residents. And I would like to also use this time personally, as I mentioned, I think this is a priority. I think this is very important. And so, so I would like to work with other, city council members, and I can do that, and would like to reach out and see what other cities are thinking and what we could work on together. So I would be interested in that sort of collaboration and on taking on some of that as well. I know that we have council members in different regional groups who have information about what's happening at different levels and different options as well. And so I think we can bring all of that information. I think we don't need to only rely on our city staff resources. I think we can also have conversations, council members to council members, and in our regional responsibilities as well.
Sure. Just a question on that. Would you be considering something like taking a 3-person council member task force and sort of hashing through this like was done with the I can't remember what we call them, rules of procedure? Just a suggestion, don't need an answer, but something that could get thrown out. Councilmember Martz, followed by Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Martz. Just hoping that as we talk about where we might look for assistance outside the city, I'm hoping that Arch could be involved in the conversation. They certainly know what's going on regionally and even within our city. They've been a good long-term partner and know the lay of the land for low income and affordable housing. If King County has information that's available. And finally, we've already heard from some housing NGOs. Obviously, they have a particular point of view, but I would imagine both housing NGOs and landlord NGOs might be able to, a couple of phone calls would at least provide some corner points for conversation. So I'm hoping those will all be resources that'll be force multipliers for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. I I guess just first to comment on the city administrator's comments, I see a really, I guess in my eyes, a clear first step is just to review the questions and concerns that have been emailed to us, whether they be from the Rental Housing Association or from landlords, next to our ordinance. Because I think a lot of those questions and concerns can be cleared up fairly quickly, and then there are less holes, and then there are just a few things that we really need to look at what the region's doing, and I recognize how difficult that is, being that other folks aren't doing it. I was also going to mention arts, so kudos, Councilmember Martz. Another is, I serve as our representative on the Regional Affordable Housing Committee, and the staff for that committee are primarily King County and I'm going through this report, another entity called the Housing Interjurisdictional something what another. But they have always, during every meeting, said, lean on us, like they are here for our support. So I will put them in contact with you, and with Monica knows the staff there too, and see how they can assist us in this.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I'm not sure that the administration has Monica's availability to coordinate. That's something we're all going to have to discuss, because in order for her to do it, something will have to come off. I do like the brainstorming. I do like getting the list of resources. I'm keeping a list, and we have Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Goodman here. My comments will sound familiar. This isn't a regional issue. It's not a city issue. It's a statewide issue. And so I think that the other folks that need to be at a table and we need to be talking to are our legislators and finding out what the thought is about something coming forward in the next session. And I really do think that this is something that needs to be dealt with by the legislature. And so I'm hoping that we get those conversations going, and maybe it's more letter writing. Anyway, I'm going to support the motion to put this on August 25th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. I believe it's Deputy Council President Ray next, followed by Councilmember DeMichelle.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Chris Ray. I have a couple of thoughts. One is not to be labeled as the one who always wants to create a council task team, but I think this is this is an opportunity for the council actually to roll up our sleeves and help them do some of this work. And I think we could create a task team that could offload some of this work and also allow the council to take ownership of this ordinance in a much more tangible way, and to reach out to our colleagues in other regional committees, reach out to the county, reach out to other cities. Those are relationships that we should have and we could leverage. So if it would be the will of the body, I think that would be an interesting way to go. The other point I wanted to make is I agree with Council Member Goodman that this is a statewide issue. And quite honestly, I think that the governor's moratorium addresses most of the issues that we've tried to address. And my belief is that we are pursuing this ordinance because we wanted to be able to provide a level of protection in the event that the governor should not. And so the other thing I think would be very helpful is if we could dispatch our lobbyists to make sure that the governor understands the importance of keeping this in place for as long as possible, so that we're not in a position where we're having to put our own backstop in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. And if it hasn't been brought up, there is a rumor, and it is just a rumor, that the federal government may do something as well, maybe even out to the spring. Many moving pieces. This is COVID. Welcome to COVID. I do not see, Councilmember DeMichelle, sorry. Yes, I do. One more.
Okay, thank you. I want to second Councilmember Ray's idea of having a team task force, and I'd be happy to be on that. And of course, I am sitting on the Eastside Human Services Forum as your representative. So there again is another group of really good resources for us when it comes to housing issues. So I think all of those are great ideas. We need some coordination to figure out how we're going to do that, but I would be glad to serve on that.
So what I'm hearing in terms of resources that I've summed up is that there are nonprofit partners out there, such as Arch. There's resources at King County, housing groups, landlord groups, potential council member task force, using our lobbyists, using our attorney to review concerns that were mentioned in correspondence and by public comment this evening next to our proposed ordinance. Also that lobbying state legislatures, lobbying at the federal level, potentially letter writing. Those are all the ideas that kind of got thrown on the table. So who wants to take a stab at, well, let me ask the city administrator if there's any questions on that, and then some sort of wrap up of what we think next steps are. City administrator, do you have any comments? Or are we ready to just go to next steps? Okay, I'm seeing a comment from Councilmember Goodman and a comment from Council President Hunt. Councilmember Goodman.
I just wanted to say I spaced out, said I would support it. I already voted on it. Sorry.
You're just clarifying.
It's
awesome.
already late. It's already late in the week. It's already Monday. Sorry.
Nobody even poked you in the chat box for that one. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I just wanted to say that if we do, as a council, think that the task force is a good idea, I would also volunteer for that.
So what I'm hearing is that Council Member Hall on the Regional Affordable Housing Commission, Councilmember DeMichelle on the East Side Human Services Forum, and Council President are thinking of forming an ad hoc. And I am not really sure how to do that on camera, but it sounds like a great idea, and there's 3 hands in the air. Is there anyone else that is interested in joining this group, where we would then have to pick? Clerk is now showing up to tell us what we can and cannot do. So.
Yes, I would just like to comment that if the council's interested in forming an ad hoc group, that I'd recommend it be formalized by motion, and that motion could specify the desired outcome of the group, when they'd be returning to the council, and the members who would be a part of it.
That sounds great. Is there a council member prepared to make a motion? The other option we could do, if it is to take a 5-minute break, and we may be able to work up a motion that somebody can present. What is your preference? Take a 5-minute break? We're out for 5 minutes. Thank you. Call the meeting back to order from our break. We are returning, and council is considering an action that they would like to take in relation to resourcing this issue. Is there someone? I see that the Council President Hunt has a motion to make.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt, and I will make a slight change to the motion that was proposed, if that was okay. So my proposed motion is I move to create an ad hoc committee to review AB 8013 and propose housing stability strategies comprised of council members DeMichelle, Hall, and Hunt, reporting to the full council at a special study session on August 25th and returning to the full council on or before September 9th, 2020.
Is there a second? I'm looking in the chat box for a hand. Councilmember Walsh.
This is Councilmember Walsh, and I had my fingers on the wrong keys. I would like to second that motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to create an ad hoc committee to review AB 013 and propose housing stability strategies comprised of Councilmembers DeMichelle, Hall, and Hunt, reporting to the full council at a special study session on August 25th and returning to the full council on or before September 9th, 2020. Is there discussion? Okay, thank you. Council President Hunt for a comment.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this ad hoc committee, and I think, as I've said several times this evening, I think this is one of the most important and challenging issues we are going to have to deal with as a lingering effect of COVID-19 on our residents. And I also slightly changed the wording of the proposed motion to be more specific than just eviction, because I think there are also challenges around housing stability, such as that if you begin eviction proceedings, that goes on your record. And so I think considering all of those, and even if you aren't ultimately evicted, and so eviction prevention seems a bit narrow, and I think we can consider housing stability as that's really the goal is, as I see it, is housing stability to address all of the challenges that renters have right now around COVID-19 and financial impacts.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. My comment is just that I hear, the challenges around tenants, but I also would urge those working on this to think about the challenges regarding the landlords. I think it's far too easy for folks to not remember that landlords are finding this very challenging too, and they have mortgages to pay, and all of the expenses that go with it, all of the things that we've heard about in the email comments and in the public comments, those are all important. And so I really do not want this to be a one-sided strategy. So go forth and do good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Hall.
Thanks, Mayor Pauley. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. Real quick, good comment, Councilmember Goodman. And to that point, we have to consider the viability and economic health of our landlords too, if they're not able to pay their mortgages and their insurance and then their property taxes. If they're not able to pay property taxes, then the services that come back around to help tenants are affected too. So it's full circle. So we've got to work. I'm committed to looking at this from a large lens. And my comment that I just wanted to say was, please lean on me. I know you're struggling with staff ability to be able to support council needs. So I will do whatever I need to with work. Just feel free to lean.
Councilmember Hall, that's very nice. This is the direction the city's been heading for a while. Why we are starting to occupy regional seats and why we are starting to work with other cities is so that we make this work out together. Council member, no more council members in the chat box. I'm going to go back to the motion. The motion is to create an ad hoc committee to review AB 8013 and propose housing stability strategies comprised of council members DeMichelle, Hall, and Hunt, reporting to the full council at a special study session on August 25th and returning to the full council on or before September 9th, 2020. All those in favor will do a roll call vote. It's only been 5 months. I'll get there at some point. City Clerk?
Beginning with Councilmember Martz. Councilmember Martz, thank you. Deputy Council President Ray.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh.
Aye.
Councilmember DeMichelle.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
Council President Hunt.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, 0 nays.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. I'm going to go back and look at our agenda for this evening. So thank you for all of that. We are into ID 0735, the next item on our agenda, which is the virtual meeting check-in. This item was discussed at the July 20th City Council meeting. There's no formal action being requested. Staff will make a brief presentation followed by an opportunity for council input and direction. And I'd like to invite City Clerk Tina Eggers to introduce this item.
Hi, thank you. Clerk Eggers speaking. As you know,
and Tina, I think we're having some audio issues. Not sure if your headset is working.
It is. So let me try one other thing. Can you hear any sound?
It's breaking up. It's every other word.
Is that clearer? Worse? Same? Okay. Let me try going on.
We're losing you.
Okay, hold on.
All right. Any better with that?
2 thumbs up.
Okay. Thank you.
You got it.
Well, as you can see, I'm in a different location today, and so thank you for your patience. You know, earlier this year, we pivoted to the COVID-19 emergency, public health recommendations, and we began to modify how these council meetings were held. Parameters that were set by the governor continued to evolve, and we quickly shifted to planning, testing, and implementation efforts. This allowed the council, you, to continue its business and allowed our emerging issues needing to be addressed by boards, commissions, and task force to be conducted. I want to say thank you. Thank you to the mayor, thank you to council, thank you to administration and staff, you know, IT, communications, deputy city clerk, everyone who participated helped us with this success, and you know, it was as seamless as it could be, even despite some of our audio hiccups, but thank you again. So some of the data that we have, let me look at some stats here that I wanted to share, is we've hosted 50 virtual meetings, none of which needed to be canceled or rescheduled due to technical or quorum issues. Of the 50 virtual meetings, 10 were community engagement or other programming, 17 were boards, commissions, or task force meetings, and 23 were council-related. Of your 23 council meetings, you've held 56 hours of meetings and heard 52 public comments. And you've received extensive comments submitted by email. I think these numbers are really impressive, and they're worth noting. So I wanted to take time to do that. You asked what we'd like to share that's working well from the clerk's perspective, and there's several. We have a secure platform, which is important to our network safety, and to date, our meetings have been free of any harmful, unwanted interruptions by outside attendees. Noticing, we've made best efforts to ensure that the public is informed about how your meetings are held, how to participate, and we offer a variety of alternative ways to watch or provide public comment. Content meeting materials and presentations are posted as part of the packet. Your meeting facilitation and use of chat, as well specifically as a procedural tool, and your use of roll call are working great. Many other jurisdictions aren't doing these elements well, so I wanted to, again, take note of that. So what's not working well or could be improved from our perspective? I can tell you it takes a lot of resources to pull off a successful meeting, and we want to be thoughtful in the tools used and how they're executed. So in doing so, we found some frustration working within certain constraints of the system, such as controlling sound, video, and the limited functionality where, such as where individuals are seated at the meeting. At times, we can encounter some background sound issues, maybe difficulty hearing others due to various use of speaker or microphones, but that can be resolved through ways of ensuring that you have the equipment that you need. And of course, we'll be listening this evening to your conversation to hear if there are any other equipment needs that might be mentioned. And then lastly, we've heard from a couple individuals in the community who have expressed frustration with not providing public comment period after each agenda item for study sessions. And while internally we appreciated the opportunity to have a consolidated approach to public comment, you certainly can modify this. We'll be listening to your dialogue this evening, and we'll make changes if directed. And then finally, you asked, what issues should or might be addressed. We found two. We recommend that some language should be added to your rules that address your attendance at virtual meetings, particularly during this emergency health or public safety situations. And then if there's a desire to make significant changes to the virtual meeting format, then we might recommend investing further in the WebEx platform, and that would require a financial commitment. And that was it as far as my opening comments. You have the Deputy City Clerk on the line as well. We're available to answer questions. And we, of course, look forward to hearing your discussion this evening. Mayor Polly?
Thank you, Tisha and Tina, for being here. This is very helpful. I'm going to propose and just look for head nods, a format for this conversation this evening. I think going to general questions next would be great. And then after all of the questions have been asked, before getting into deliberations, I would like to go through the email that was circulated on Sunday and make sure that council feels that the questions that were posed by Councilmember Goodman and Councilmember DeMichelle have been thoroughly vetted, or if there's additional information on those. And if that's okay, just give me a little head nod, and that's how we'll go through this conversation. Got it. Thank you. Lots of nodding heads. Let's go to Councilmember Marks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Marks. I just have a question for the clerk's office. In talking about the technologies that we have open to us, have we looked at Zoom Gov as different from regular Zoom? I use Zoom Gov at my work because we deal with secure contracts and have found it to be extremely useful. And I use it probably about 8 hours a day. So just wondering. Thanks.
Tina, is that something you need to call a friend for because it's IT and it costs money, or is that something you can answer tonight?
We did explore Zoom in the earlier this year. We initially stayed away from Zoom overall from a security perspective, but it sounds like you have found a solution that may be different. So I don't see John Traeger on the line, but we certainly will and could ask that question of him.
I'm here, actually.
Go ahead, John.
Using one of our accounts that says IT.
There you go. John?
Yes.
Thoughts?
So, well, at the time you talked about March 3rd, Zoom was not there yet. Obviously, they've made some rapid changes, and they're expensive. So the cost for Zoom government probably is approaching what we were talking about doing with increasing what we're spending with WebEx to kind of meet feature parity, if you will, with breakout rooms and that kind of stuff.
Councilmember Martz, does that answer your question?
I think so. Our company is very cost conscious, so I would definitely make sure, I'm sure we're using the least expensive option that meets our security needs, but thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Goodman here. Tina, you raised it first, so I'll follow up on it. The question about having public comment after each agenda item at study sessions, which is what we do in our in-person meetings or have done in the past. Can you talk a little bit about what, if any, challenges there are for that? And I think more than just I am interested in that. Council member DeMichelle also asked a question about it, and I've talked to several members of the public who are interested in that, but I would like to know a little bit more about the challenges and just more about it. Thanks.
Sure, and if our Deputy City Clerk has anything to add to my comments, she's welcome to come on camera and share her thoughts. I can tell you that if we're simply looking to do maybe a less informal or a less formal way of collecting those comments after each item, I think we can be successful at that. But if we're looking for sign-up sheets, it's sort of where if your agenda items start getting high interest and high participation, then I think the sign-up sheets are more effective. and that just would take some time and energy. And currently our sign-up sheets are posted at the start of the month, and this would require us to do some sign-up sheets after the agenda is posted. So there's a delay, but you certainly could continue in the way that you are and have audience comments at the start, and then maybe make an announcement and notice on the agenda that in addition to this time, you could open each item up for comment by others.
Thank you. That's a great question, Councilmember Goodman. I know it's one that we are definitely going to talk about tonight. And for those that have participated on large remote meetings, it's an interesting concept on how you manage who gets to speak and when they get to speak. So it's interesting. Next up is Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. Clarifying question for Clerk Eggers. You mentioned rules added to our council policies on the attendance of virtual meetings. Are you referring to like community meetings where we might run into issues with more than 3 council members, where if it was in the public, we would just stand on opposite sides of the room, but it's hard to do that in like a Zoom room? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I wasn't addressing that. That's a different sort of quorum OPMA issue, and it's clear that you would need to be limited to 3 council members or less. And if a 4th arriving council member showed up, they would need to depart, just as you would with an in-person meeting. That's very different than like a community celebration. The comment about rules for remote would be some clarity in your rules and regs that just says we recognize that you have the ability to meet remotely when situations require it, or when it's health or public safety are at risk. Right now, your rules are silent on it, and there was an emphasis on being physically present at your meeting. So we wanted just to provide some clarification there.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the, I didn't see that. And the only other thing, I was upset that WebEx wouldn't let us change our background, but that's probably for the best.
Understand.
Very funny. Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DiMichele. I'm going to follow up on Councilmember Hall's question. Just a hypothetical situation. Let's just say we're in phase 4 and 5 council members can appear in person in the city council, and then 2 of us, for whatever reason, aren't comfortable doing that. That maybe they've been exposed to COVID or whatever. So would this, so what you're suggesting apply to that situation, and going into the future, if we had a council member who was sick or, I don't know, had some other reason, that we could do a hybrid meeting with some people in person and some people coming in remotely? Is that what we're talking about?
What we're recommending would be this hybrid approach as we are in the phases of returning back to sort of open government and in-person meetings. So we would anticipate that a physical location may be required. There may be capacity issues. There may be those that may be uncomfortable. And we would encourage the rules to be written so that you could continue in a hybrid during that duration. If you want to look at something different, I think maybe at a later time, maybe once you get back or through these phases, then you could revisit how you would want to allow other circumstances for that.
And then the question might be also, how will the public see 5 of us in person and 2 of us remotely? So that would be a technical issue as well. And then another question, as I understand it, on the WebEx platform, you can't break out into small group discussions the way you can on Zoom. Is that correct?
In the current platform that we have and the level of platform, those breakout sessions aren't there. We could have additional meetings, and then it's just contingent on the number of licenses that we have. So similar to our special meetings are separate from our study sessions, we just scheduled separate meetings there. But I believe WebEx does have a platform that allows you to have some breakout if you pay for the full license.
And do we know how much more that would cost?
We'll call an IT friend for that, Councilmember Michelle. Mr. Traeger.
That's the enterprise version. That's about double what we're paying now. So we're paying about $5,000 a year is what we're on the hook for. And it would be about $10,000 for the same number of seats we have now.
Okay.
And then that has breakout rooms and a few other features. I don't think it has backgrounds though.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Yeah, and that just covers the platform. There's another element, which is the support that we might need for it. And so we've been fortunate that IT had someone who was very customer service and very technical and could help us pivot through this period of time, but now their work is getting shifted to utility project implementation. So we would have a deficit there on our tech support. So we would need to look at how many hours would be needed for that and where does that come from.
Thank you. Councilmember Michelle, this is the mayor, and I just want to reiterate that in our council process, you do have the right to review as a body your rules of procedure. And I think there are two questions in what you asked. I think the question that we're working on tonight is remote meetings during emergency and unusual situations. But I think you have a valid point that at some point the council may want to revisit hybrid meetings and remote meetings in non-emergency situations. I just think that's probably in the next year at a time if the council decides to do that. Thank you for asking that question. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. When we're talking about technology and how our council will use it and then also other areas of the city, I wonder if there is some interest from other departments like the municipal court or in our community engagement that having a different system that allows for secure video conferencing might be useful. So that's kind of one question is this only a conversation about how council uses the technology, or are there other considerations we might look at?
So Councilmember Walsh, you are breaking up a little bit, but I think we have the intent of your question. Do we use this technology for other types of meetings? You mentioned court, and I think Mr. Traeger is probably best to tell you which technology we use for different types of meetings. Don?
So yeah, unfortunately, it's a needlessly complicated issue. Some of this was driven by Homeland Security, who was sending us a steady stream of missives saying, do not use Zoom, do not use Zoom. So early on, we said, okay, we won't use Zoom. So we were using Skype. We converted to Teams, which was used for all the internal city meetings. What we found out was Teams did not work on as old a systems as WebEx does. So when we attempted to use Teams for public meetings, you couldn't, some phones older than a certain state, which are still workable phones for public, wouldn't load the app. So people couldn't see the meeting. So we were kind of forced into this, what's the lowest common denominator for public access on their old smartphones or older computers? So that's kind of why between those two things, we ended up with that one technology. Now the court was forced by the state courts to use a Zoom product. So we had to have an isolated PC that's got a designated use, and that's all it does, and it can't access anything internal to our network. It's only used in the court sessions and tied to the cameras there, as well as in the jail. So they can do virtual arraignment and that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, we're stuck with 3 platforms right now, and I'm not very excited either. If I could have one, it would be great.
Councilmember Walsh, does that answer your question?
Yes, but I did have one other question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the other question is, right now we're using these platforms as kind of a meeting platform. Have we considered looking at some of the webinar capabilities that would allow more participants to be able to participate in a video platform, but not be presenters. I just wonder whether that would provide some of the options that people are looking at from the public's perspective.
Clerk Eckers?
Hi, I can tell you that the enterprise platform of WebEx should, I believe, provide more of those services that you're speaking of. I know that we are using in our community engagement video on for attendees because that environment is more conducive to that interaction. And then as we get into our more formal meetings or council meetings, it's best to provide, we can't seat everyone where we'd like them to. We don't have control over the video, but the enterprise system would provide more of that control.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Walsh, this is the mayor, and I just would like to share just some other thoughts from our Strong Mayors meeting as well. All cities are struggling with which platform is the best and trying to figure out for their community how to meet the needs and the demands since we can no longer meet in person. They have had issues with what the city clerk said, as well as having inappropriate behavior on the videos, as well as having community members in the chat box with the council members at the same time, and the chat box is a public record. And so there's been numerous complications to how to do this. And there is no really perfect solution. Our community and you need to figure out what works best for you all. So I have one more question from Councilmember DeMichelle.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DeMichelle, and you just touched on the question I had because the question was, how do we manage people who want to speak after each agenda item at the work study sessions? And so my thought was, could we give those folks a link to the meeting, which would give them access to the chat box, and people are learning to use the chat box very effectively to just say question, or if we made it really clear that that was not a place for them to be talking with us, it is only to indicate that they're ready to make a comment. So that was a question I had, is instead of having them call in, could we give them the same link that all of us have so that they have access to the chat box?
Yeah, there's, let Tina, City Clerk, talk about that as well. There's pros and cons. City of Kent has found it doesn't matter what you say. They continue to use the chat box to express their frustration during the council meeting, and it is a public record, and council members have found it very distracting. You do have the ability of disabling the chat feature, and we then would have to figure out how to work our way through our meeting with visual cues, which when we're working from home can be hard to have a script pulled up and a presentation and a chat box. Everything gets about by the time you get it all. So yes, it's possible. There are some other compromises with it. City Clerk Eckers?
Yes, and again, the interaction of the video and chat can be more helpful in other types of meetings, and we are using those tools there. For the council meetings, again, we're looking for more structure. And I can tell you that we are leaning heavily on the Attorney General's advice on how meetings should be accessible. And the most simplest platform and the phone feature is that. And so we that is our first preference, and our strongest advocate is to phone in, and then continue to, showcase and encourage all the other ways that our videos can be watched and streamed. And we're fortunate that we already have, an audience watching your meetings in that environment. So, Tisha, did you have anything else to add? Okay.
So thank you for the questions. I think in order to make sure that the council gets to discuss each of the items of concern, I'm going to go back to some of the questions and read through the ones that were submitted in advance. If you feel like one of those hasn't been fully answered, please indicate so in the chat box. Why are we having virtual meetings and under what authority? The city code and council rules don't address the topic of virtual meetings. Is this an issue? Why or why not? What technical parameters are we working under? What we can and can't do? What we could do but is difficult, etc. What is working well? What is working not so well from a clerk's perspective? Are there things clerks think should be addressed? For example, adding to the code and/or our council rules. Were there any, and please use the chat box to let me know if you feel like a little more information is needed on any of those questions. And until I see something, I'll continue. I have started a little list of items. I can see that there needs to be some discussion amongst the council members about public comment at a study session, whether it's less formal or formal. Clarity on having meetings remotely under what situations. And then sort of might be a conversation here around the technology and the potential upgrade to WebEx, and I can't remember the extension, but another forum which does allow for a few more issues. The questions that the council conversation, if we want to start with this, there are 4 additional questions. What does council think is working well and not so well? And if you have any comments on that, please indicate in the chat box and we can move around through the council. We may have covered some of this in your comments already, but let's just see if there's anything else to throw out on the table. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. What I think is working well is that we haven't had meetings break. We haven't had people have a hard time participating. Things have gone smoothly, and I think we can absolutely credit city staff and the clerk's office in particular in IT in just making things work, as well as being able to transition between 3 different platforms when we saw the need for additional capabilities. That's not something that every city staff would be willing to do. And so I think we can absolutely credit that as things that are doing well. And in many cases, we don't notice those because it's just working. And that's something that we need to recognize. The things that I think aren't as well, or that could be improved are probably just getting more public participation and making them feel like they're a part of the meeting and not just an accessory. And so I'm looking for a way to solve that, but I wouldn't put that above being able to have a meeting in this environment that works. So I think exploring options is where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other council members at that time wanting, Councilmember DiMichele.
Sorry about that. This is Councilmember DiMichele. Just want to say that I sat in on a meeting through the Sound Cities Association last week talking about virtual meetings, and there were city council members from all over the state of Washington, and that was a really good perspective for me to get because Councilmember Walsh is absolutely right. We are doing way better than a lot of other cities are doing, and we are involving a lot of people. Some city councils have even dropped having community comment during this period. So the fact that we have such good participation, I think, is kudos to the staff. I will say from my own point of view that I miss seeing the faces of the people who are talking to us. It's not something that I'm willing to throw out the whole system in order to achieve. It's just a personal reaction that I have. I would like to see their faces. But if we can't solve that problem, I think that what we are doing now is very, very good, certainly a higher quality than a lot of other places are achieving. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I too think that staff has done just a fabulous job of, first of all, pivoting in the beginning, and second of all, getting us fairly quickly to a place where we just have had so few hangups, and it's, in my opinion, just so professionally done, and I really appreciate that. I would. My preference would be to have figure out a way to have comments from the public after each agenda item. That would be my priority over seeing people's faces. I mean, I like to see people's faces too, and so, but I think I'm more interested in having the engagement. I've not really seen any change between what we've had in person and what folks are doing now. Sometimes they bring scripted comments and sometimes they don't. When we've had study sessions and committee meetings before in person, they will bring scripted comments, maybe not. And after we've had presentations and questions by council members, sometimes the public comments are revised based on what questions and maybe the direction the council appears to be heading in, but sometimes they're changed and sometimes they're not. But I think there is just a very high value in the public having an opportunity to speak to us and provide some feedback to us in real time as policies may be forming during our meetings. And so I do think that's important, and I will be interested to see what my fellow council members think about that. Thank you. And thank you. I also want to say thank you to Tina and Atisha for putting this together tonight on very short notice. I know you guys are so busy, and that means that you really had to be ready for this late last week, so you had very little time, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Marks, followed by Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Marks. I very much agree with Councilmember Goodman that taking comment at each item is beneficial. It was one of the things that I always liked about when I was able to work that way in committee. I think it leads to a more robust conversation. In terms of how we might actually do it, again, I understand this whole WebEx versus other technologies question, but some of the technologies allow you to raise your hand. And so what you could conceivably do is allow people to raise their hand to be recognized and still have control over the chat and the voice communications. And I think that would address it. It might involve more work in support, but it would maintain the control that we need, because yes, I have been involved in large groups where we tell people to keep the chat for business only, and it's comical for a while, and then it just gets really frustrating. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. City Councilmember Zach Hall here. And let me also throw in my thanks to Tina and Tisha in particular for at the end of public comment, always calling out to see if there's any additional public comment. I think we found several times where we found several more people, and that it's been very valuable. We would have missed those people without that. So thank you. For hearing public comment before items, I say let's try it. Let's do let's try it out for a while and see what it looks like. I don't think we need to invest in a whole new system. We pay more money to try it out, but we can see what it's like logistically with this system without seeing people's faces, doing it over the phone. But if it's, yeah, I mean, let's try it out and then hear more from city clerks about what that means for how they're running meetings. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't at least try it. And then in terms of video participation, I know the school district does something kind of like that. They do Zoom where participants can come in. They don't have access to the chat. They don't have access to a speaker or anything. It's just the video that they can see. I think YouTube is fine. They can see the exact same thing. So I think also just recognizing where, it's pretty much the same thing and we're saving money potentially is an important consideration for me when I'm looking at our virtual meetings. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I will recap what we heard. What's working well, access, it's successful implementation of WebEx. What is not well, maybe if we could find ways for more public to participate and make them feel like they are a real part of the meeting. Well is how the community comments are being incorporated into the meeting. Not well, seeing the faces, not being able to see the faces of who is talking to us. On the good side, these are very professional meetings. Would like the ability to, well, we have the ability to raise your hand, but want to make sure we'd be able to do that even in the informal format, and making sure we do call outs for additional public comment. Not well, comments after each study session agenda item. And again, that was repeated 3 times. So I'm starting a little list of things to wrap up on and have conversations around, but I am going to proceed to the next question on the list, which was, this is the list I'm trying to take. Are there tweaks and changes we are interested in making? I have 3 written down so far. I will read them and then you guys can flag me in the comment bar if you want me to add to them. Are there opportunities for the future, such as whether some elements of virtual meetings can be incorporated into in-person meetings? I'm going to have City Administrator Bobkowitz maybe use his crystal ball to tell you what he thinks is not just coming in the fall, but maybe in the next year or so, because it's going to be interesting for quite a while. City Administrator Bobkowitz?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I think we are going to need to come up with a hybrid format. And I would hope that one of the takeaways from this evening would be to have the administration work on amendments to your rules for the non-emergency post-COVID period. I think some of the comments that were made earlier, I think were spot on as far as our ability to be prepared to do that. So I don't know, Madam Mayor, how more specific you want to get this evening under that, other than to take the responsibility that over the next couple of months we'll be working on some revisions to the council's rules to address that.
City Administrator, that is great. I just wanted to let them know that we have been talking about, you and I have been talking about, the path back to normal is probably a long and winding path. And so those were very good points that were made by the council members today. Council Member Ray has a comment.
Hi, thank you. This is Chris Ray. When we put together the last set of council rules of procedure, we talked fairly extensively about remote meetings during normal times. And, it's a different council, it's a different time, but that's not something I want to enter into lightly. We deliberated it for a long time and decided that was not something that we thought was in our best interest. Now, I'm really open to the idea of more and interesting ways for the public to interact with the council remotely. And I'm really interested in, during a transition period from what we have right now to back to a more stable setting of using remote meetings. But I think if we're going to talk about remote meetings as an ongoing way of doing business, that's going to take some serious deliberations among this body before I would be comfortable endorsing it. So there are some areas that I'm comfortable exploring, but not necessarily remote meetings.
Thank you. I'm going to go through a list that I've assembled from listening to your conversation tonight, and please raise your hand in the chat box if you feel there's something else you'd like to add to the list. The council would like to talk about having public comment at study sessions in, it sounded to me like a less formal way, making it easy for us to administer and easy for the public to comment. So that was one area for discussion. Clarity on meetings remotely, either in 2 situations. Does the council want to talk about it in emergency situations only, or the broader conversation of what a hybrid looks like in the future? And then the last was whether or not the council was interested in pursuing different technology that would allow some of the additional features that are either needs or nice to have. And those were the only three things that I pulled out. So please raise your hand if there's something else that you think the council body would like to discuss this evening besides those categories. If not, thank you. Councilmember DiMichele, to add?
Oh, just to add on to the additional technology that we might invest in, having been in lots of Zoom meetings in the last few months, that breakout session capability that Zoom has is, there are so many innovative ways that is being used. It's such a great way to involve the community. It might not pertain particularly to council meetings, but certainly like the convening, the environmental convening that was held this week or earlier last week, it would have been a great benefit to that group. And I think I would really like to see us invest in the additional capabilities of that platform to be able to do that. Great.
Thank you. City Administrator Bob Kritz, you'd like to make a comment on next steps?
Yes, Madam Mayor. With those three steps identified, what I'd like to suggest is first that the administration work over the next few months and come back to the City Council with some amended rules that would deal with remote meetings. I think we want to take some time to consider the comments this evening and come back with those ideas. Secondly, I think there appears to be great interest in having the ability for residents to make comments after presentations for each item during study sessions. With the council's concurrence, let us go and sort through that. I don't believe we'll be ready for tomorrow night, there's special meetings on the 10th. There's a study session on the 11th. We could certainly shoot for that study session on the 11th to have some procedures in place. And then if we need to refine those procedures, we can move forward and do that. The third, regarding the platforms, there's really a simple answer for the reason why we've not expended additional dollars on video, and that is because we still believe we have a $3 million deficit in the current fiscal year. And so the staff has been reluctant to take on what might be considered as nice to have additional expenses, but we'll commit to continue to look at the WebEx platform. As Mr. Traeger said, we are not comfortable with Zoom. We have been advised by the federal government that Zoom is not an appropriate platform to conduct government business. And so we want to be mindful of that, but we can look, if it's a $5,000 additional expense for WebEx, we can certainly continue to evaluate that and see if that makes sense. But again, the reason for everyone to understand why we've not done it is because we are facing a $3 million deficit, and I think staff rightfully said, let's leverage the investments that we already have and see how best we can make them work. So, Madam Mayor, perhaps with those three commitments, that addresses, I think, the remaining issues, and with the council's concurrence, we can move forward.
I am good. Thank you very much, City Administrator Bob Kritz. I'm going to go back to Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick comment from Councilmember Martz. Once again, Zoom Gov is totally different than regular Zoom and has completely different security protocols. And I can tell you, very secure information can be shared in Zoom Gov. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. I believe we are at the end of our conversation. I'm not seeing much more. I'll see a few comments. So we'll finish off with Council President Hunt. Has a comment.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I was thinking more about Councilmember DiMichele's comments about the breakout rooms. I hadn't expected to make a comment on this, but I do think that with the social isolation that a lot of people are feeling, having options for talking with their neighbors, that could be really valuable. It could be a way that sort of replaces like the if you had a neighborhood barbecues and things that people aren't able to do to talk with other community members. So for those sorts of community meetings, I think it would definitely be I think a valuable way for people to speak with each other in smaller groups. So I would consider, and I understand the budget constraints and that it's more expensive, but I do think that might that might be valuable for folks given the situation.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. Not seeing any additional comments. There was no formal action requested this evening, just feedback and direction, which you have done. Thank you very much. I think the City Administrator summed up the next steps quite well. So, oops, I'm looking back in the chat box. Okay, no additional comments. So there being no further business this evening, the meeting is adjourned at 9:10. Thank you all and have a great night.